The Zalzar Dominion had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Their empire stretched across countless systems, their war fleets unmatched, their technology centuries ahead of any species that dared to resist. Conquest was not just a strategy, it was their way of life. Civilizations crumbled before them. Their homeworlds turned into barren husks, their histories erased. Resistance was a concept they barely understood. For the Zalzar, war was mathematical. Their fleets, governed by advanced AI, could predict battles before they began. Their shields rendered enemy weapons useless. Their ground forces, enhanced by cybernetic augmentation, had never faced an opponent they could not crush. They did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They consumed, and when they turned their gaze toward the Sol system, they expected nothing more than another swift extermination. Humanity was an anomaly, a young species, barely a footnote in the grand history of the galaxy. They had no interstellar empire, no technological wonders that rivaled the Dominions. Their ships were primitive, their weapons outdated. Yet, there was something unsettling about them. Unlike other species, humanity did not kneel when confronted with superior force. They did not surrender their homeworld at the first sign of an approaching fleet. They fought, and they fought irrationally. When the Dominion scouts first arrived, they observed no signs of panic, no desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, human leaders responded with an arrogance that the Zalzar found baffling. A single transmission broadcast across all Dominion channels. "We suggest you turn around." The Dominion laughed. No species had ever dared speak to them in such a way. They deployed a pacification force, a mere fraction of their military might, more than enough to wipe out a species with no experience in galactic warfare. The fleet arrived in orbit around Mars, scanning human defenses. The results were pathetic. A handful of outdated warships, planetary defense cannons that barely qualified as a threat, and ground forces that still relied on ballistic weaponry. This would be easy. They launched their attack. Orbital bombardments rained down on human military bases. The first wave of Dominion ground forces landed on Earth, expecting to march unchallenged to victory. It should have been a massacre. It was, but not in the way the Zalzar expected. The first anomaly was a radio silence. Every other conquest had followed the same pattern. Chaos, distress signals, planetary leaders begging for surrender. But from Earth, nothing. No transmissions, no distress calls. Just silence. Then, their soldiers began to disappear. At first, it seemed like a minor setback. Isolated squads going dark in the dense urban landscapes. Then, entire platoons vanished. Dominion war machines were found abandoned, their pilots missing. Zalzar Command assumed a technical failure until they intercepted helmet footage from one of their fallen soldiers. Darkness, sudden movement, and then blunt force trauma. No energy weapons, no plasma blades. Just something heavy and solid, crushing exoskeletons and disabling cybernetic implants with raw, brute force. It made no sense. Dominion soldiers were designed to fight with precision, relying on AI-assisted targeting and enhanced reaction times. Yet they were being overwhelmed, not by superior technology, but by sheer unpredictability. The humans didn't fight like any species the Zalzar had encountered. They didn't stand in formation. They didn't engage in honorable combat. They struck from the shadows. They exploited weaknesses the Dominion had never considered, and they used weapons that should have been obsolete. A single human ambush was recovered for analysis. A Dominion patrol, armed with energy rifles and guided drones, was slaughtered in under 60 seconds. The attackers had no visible armor, no energy shielding, just crude melee weapons, blunt objects heavy enough to shatter Zalzar skulls. The AI couldn't process it. These weren't precision strikes. They weren't strategic energy pulses. They were wild, vicious swings, smashing through defenses with terrifying efficiency. The Zalzar Command dismissed the first losses as a fluke. They doubled their forces, then tripled them. But the more they deployed, the worse the situation became. Their technology, so advanced that no enemy had ever stood against it, was becoming a liability. Humanity had adapted. Energy weapons, useless when you were ambushed in tight quarters, your vision obscured, your targeting system scrambled. AI-guided drones, hacked, turned against their own troops. Their soldiers, trained for open-field combat, found themselves trapped in brutal, close-quarters engagements where every corridor, every ruined city block became a slaughterhouse. And then came the final insult. A Zalzar general, one of the highest-ranking commanders in the Dominion, was captured, not by a precision strike, not by an advanced infiltration unit. No, he was dragged from his command post by a single human operative, wielding nothing but a solid steel bat. The footage spread to the Dominion's fleet like a virus. The general, clad in reinforced armor, trained in 1,000 forms of combat, was beaten unconscious by a human using what was essentially a primitive club. The humans had energy weapons. They had railguns. They had explosives. But they had chosen to use something simple, something crude, because it worked. The Zalzar had spent millennia perfecting warfare, refining their strategies, optimizing their efficiency. They had never once considered that sometimes the most effective weapon was not the most advanced, but the most direct. The pacification force was annihilated, not through superior firepower, not through advanced tactics, but through sheer brutality, human ingenuity, and a refusal to play by the rules of war that the Dominion had established. For the first time in history, the Zalzar lost a battle. And as the remnants of their fleet limped back to Dominion space, one thing became terrifyingly clear. They were not invincible, and humanity was just getting started. The loss of the pacification force was dismissed as an anomaly, a tactical miscalculation. The Dominion had crushed empires spanning thousands of systems. One failed operation meant nothing. Humanity was still insignificant, still primitive. The fleet that had been sent was never meant to be a serious offensive. It was a demonstration, a warning. And yet, it had been wiped out. The Dominion's High Council convened. The incident could not be ignored, but it also could not be acknowledged as a legitimate defeat. Their pride would not allow it. Their AI advisors calculated that the probability of human resistance posing an actual threat remained negligible. Their military analysts assured them that the next engagement would proceed as expected. The Council agreed. This time, they would send a real force. A fleet of 1,000 warships was assembled, ground forces in the millions. Their most advanced AI-controlled dreadnoughts, impenetrable planetary siege units, weapons capable of wiping entire continents off the map. It was not an invasion. It was extermination. Humanity had proven unpredictable, but unpredictability was not the same as power. The Zalzar were power, and this time, they would make an example of Earth. The fleet arrived, deploying in standard formation. No pretense of diplomacy, no warnings. They expected a desperate defense, a scrambling of outdated human warships, chaotic planetary evacuations, transmissions begging for mercy. They encountered none of that. Humanity had gone silent. Orbital scans detected no fleet position for defense, no planetary shields. Their military installations were intact but unmanned. It was almost as if Earth had been abandoned. But deep scans proved otherwise. Human life signs remained, densely packed in major cities, underground bunkers, and military zones. They were not running. They were waiting. The Dominion deployed its ground forces. The first wave landed across multiple continents. Urban centers were designated as primary targets, expected to house the remnants of human resistance. The soldiers advanced, scanners sweeping the area. No direct engagements. No signs of human opposition. Just empty streets, abandoned vehicles, quiet buildings. Then, the lights went out. Within seconds, Dominion soldiers found their HUDs flickering, targeting systems failing, communications severed. AI support going dark. Panic spread through the ranks. Without their technology, their precision, their overwhelming superiority, they were blind. And in the darkness, humanity struck. The Dominion relied on coordination, on instantaneous data sharing across their armies. They never considered what would happen if that connection was severed. They had assumed their shields made them invincible, that their armor made them unbreakable. But shields did not stop something moving at terminal velocity. Armor did not protect against a steel pipe swung with enough force to shatter bone. Humanity was not fighting a conventional war. They weren't engaging in open battle. They were dismantling the Dominion piece by piece, exploiting every weakness the Zalzar didn't even realize they had. Entire platoons disappeared into the dark. Drone patrols turned against their own forces, overridden by human hackers. And the moment Dominion Command attempted to regain control, they realized the full extent of their mistake. The Zalzar had never developed electronic warfare capabilities beyond basic countermeasures. No species had ever been reckless enough to try hacking their systems. Their AI was absolute, flawless, incorruptible. Until now, human infiltration teams had been inside their systems long before the first shot was fired. The Dominion's own networks had been turned against them. Fleet command relays jammed. Automated targeting corrupted. Their own warships began firing on one another as their AI-controlled systems spiraled into chaos. And still, the humans did not stop. The Dominion had brought their most advanced war machines to Earth. Massive quadrupedal siege platforms designed to obliterate entire cities. They were built for intimidation, indestructible by any known weapon. But they weren't indestructible to a man with a welding torch, a few pounds of thermite, and a complete disregard for self-preservation. One by one, the Dominion's strongest war machines collapsed. Not to orbital strikes, not to precision bombing runs, but to human soldiers crawling through maintenance hatches, planting explosives, and walking away as billion-credit war machines melted from the inside out. The Zalzar did not understand what they were facing. Every battle they had ever fought had been clean, efficient. Their enemies had been predictable, following the same tactical patterns. Humanity did not follow patterns. They fought dirty. They fought as if war was not an art, not a strategy, but a primal, desperate thing. They fought to win, and they did not care how. The Zalzar had superior weapons, superior numbers, superior technology. None of it mattered. For the first time in history, they were not the ones dictating the battle. They were not the ones striking fear into their enemies. They were the ones afraid. The invasion force lasted less than a week. It was not a war. It was a massacre, not for humanity, but for the Dominion. The fleet that had arrived in triumph left in disgrace, burning wreckage scattered across Earth's atmosphere. The few survivors that managed to retreat did not speak. The High Council received the reports in stunned silence. The Zalzar did not lose. It was not possible. They had built their empire on the foundation of absolute superiority. But superiority meant nothing when their enemy refused to play by their rules. Humanity had been underestimated. That mistake had cost them a fleet. They would not make it again. This was no longer a pacification, no longer a warning. The Zalzar Dominion had declared war, and for the first time in 10,000 years, they were afraid of the war they had started. The Dominion had never known fear. They had never faced an enemy that did not break under their overwhelming power. The loss of 2 fleets should have been impossible. The reports that returned to the High Council were fragmented, contradictory. The AI systems that governed their war strategies could not process the data. Humans should have been annihilated. Instead, they had turned the Dominion's own weapons against them, crushed their elite ground forces, and humiliated them on a galactic stage. The Council could not ignore reality any longer. Humanity was not weak. They were not another primitive species to be pacified. They were dangerous, unpredictable, a force that refused to be controlled. The logical course of action was clear. They would erase humanity completely. No half measures, no occupation, no integration. Just pure, calculated extermination. The Dominion's full military might was mobilized. Thousands of warships, entire legions of soldiers, their most advanced technology, their most ruthless commanders. This would not be a battle. It would be annihilation. Their war doctrine was rewritten overnight. No survivors, no prisoners. Every human world would be reduced to dust. The lesson would be eternal. No species, no matter how resilient, could defy the Zalzar and live. The Armada moved toward Sol, prepared to wipe Earth from existence. As they approached, they saw no resistance, no defense fleets, no orbital stations, just the same eerie silence that had preceded their last defeat. But this time, they would not let their arrogance blind them. They launched scout drones ahead of the fleet, scanning every inch of the system. They analyzed every possible tactic, every potential ambush, and they found nothing. Humanity had disappeared. Earth was still there, its cities intact, but no life signs registered. No energy readings. No transmissions. It was as if the entire planet had been abandoned. The Dominion hesitated. This was not how war was supposed to unfold. No enemy had ever retreated before battle. No species had ever vanished into the void. But they had come too far. Their fleets moved into position, their dreadnoughts preparing to unleash planet-cracking weapons. Then, the first ships started vanishing. Not destroyed, not shot down, just gone. One moment, a warship was in formation. The next, it was radio silent, its signal erased. No explosions, no debris, just absence. The Dominion's command structure scrambled to react, scanning for enemy presence, for cloaked ships, for anything that could explain the impossible. Then, the scream started. Across the fleet, emergency distress calls flooded the comms. Warships fully crewed, with millions of soldiers aboard, were being overrun, not by enemy fire, not by external attacks, but from within. Internal sensors showed impossible readings, hull breaches where none should be, power failures in systems designed to be redundant. And through it all, something new, something that had never been seen in any Dominion battle. Laughter. The fleet was vast, their technology unmatched. But they had underestimated one final truth about humanity. The war had never been fought on the Dominion's terms. It had never been about strength, about firepower, about numbers. It had always been about control. And control was something the Dominion had just lost. Humanity had never fought to win a battle. They had fought to end the war before it began. While the Dominion had prepared for planetary sieges, for fleet engagements, for a war of attrition, humanity had been preparing something else entirely. They had infiltrated, sabotaged, moved unseen through the Dominion's own ranks. The Dominion had assumed that humanity's primitive technology made them weak. They had failed to realize that it made them adaptable, unpredictable, untraceable. Human operatives had embedded themselves within the Dominion supply chains, their communication networks, their logistics. The moment the fleet launched, they had already lost. Their food supplies were poisoned. Their air filtration systems were compromised. Their own cybernetics, once their greatest advantage, were turned against them, causing sudden paralysis, blindness, death. On every warship, in every command center, Dominion officers collapsed, their own implants failing catastrophically. Their AI, once their greatest strength, was now their greatest weakness. Corrupted, overridden, hijacked. The humans had learned how to speak the language of the machines that governed the Dominion's military, and they had rewritten it. The Zalzar's fleet was not destroyed in battle. It was taken apart from the inside. Their warships went dark one by one. Their soldiers turned on each other, their augmented limbs malfunctioning, their suits locking them in place as oxygen drained from their compartments. The Dominion, once a force of cold, calculated destruction, was reduced to chaos. And then the final message came through. A single human broadcast, sent to every remaining Dominion ship. to every surviving officer still able to hear it. You thought we were defenseless. You thought we were weak. You thought you were untouchable. You were wrong. The Zalzar command structure collapsed. Some ships tried to flee, only to detonate as their own reactor cores went critical. Others drifted, dead in space, their crews suffocated or slaughtered. A handful of warships, disabled but intact, were left floating, silent tombs, messages to any who would dare to follow. The Dominion's greatest fleet had not just been defeated. It had been dismantled. Back on the Dominion homeworld, the High Council sat in stunned silence. Their empire, built on millennia of conquest, had never known a true threat. Now they faced annihilation, not at the hands of a species with superior firepower, not through technological advancements or brute force, but through something far more terrifying. Humanity had changed the rules, and the Dominion was not prepared for the war that was coming. The High Council chambers were silent, not the silence of order, but of fear, true fear, a concept they had never known. For the first time in their empire's long history, the Zalzar Dominion was not the predator. They were the prey. The fleet was gone. The invasion force had been eradicated. Their most advanced war machines had been turned into useless husks before they even reached the battlefield. The humans had done the impossible. Not just fought back. Not just won. They had shattered the illusion of Dominion invincibility. But what terrified the Council most was not the loss. It was the question that now loomed over them. Where was humanity? Earth was still there, but it was an illusion, a shadow of what it once was. Satellite scans showed empty streets, lifeless buildings, entire continents devoid of movement. It was not the image of a world that had fought and won. It was the image of a species that had left. The Dominion's greatest fear had always been rebellion, but rebellion they could understand. This was something else, something worse. The humans had not just rejected Dominion rule. They had disappeared from every traceable system. Their colonies were abandoned. Their transmissions had ceased. Their fleets, if they still existed, were nowhere to be found. And yet, the Dominion knew they were still out there. Trade convoys began vanishing without a trace. Research stations along the outer rim stopped responding. Entire planets went dark overnight, not destroyed but emptied. No wreckage, no battle records, just silence. At first, they believed it was another enemy, a rival empire seizing the opportunity to strike. But deep space security footage, corrupted and fragmented, showed something far worse. Shadows moving in places no ship should have been. Boarding parties appearing on Dominion vessels without alarms being triggered. Entire crews screaming into the void before their feeds cut to static. Humanity was not fighting a war. They were hunting. The Zalzar's expansion ground to a halt. Border worlds were abandoned, left to rot in fear of an unseen enemy. The Dominion's rulers, once proud and unshaken, now lived in paranoia. Every system was put on high alert. AI security was hardened. Military patrols doubled, then tripled. Protocols were rewritten. The Dominion adapted, but it did not matter. Because they did not know what they were adapting to. There was no army to confront, no fleets to track, no diplomatic envoys to negotiate surrender. The war had left the battlefield. It had moved into the darkness between the stars, where the Dominion's power meant nothing. High-ranking officers began vanishing. Some were taken from their homes, their security teams slaughtered before they could react. Others disappeared aboard warships, their escape pods found drifting, their occupants dead from terror rather than injury. The Dominion's most advanced AI, designed to predict and counteract enemy strategies, provided no answers. It did not know how to calculate an enemy that no longer followed the rules of war. The final blow came when the humans sent their first and only message since the war began. Not to the High Council, not to their military command, but to every world under Dominion control. Every species they had conquered, every civilization they had broken. You were never alone. You were never powerless. They are not gods. Rise. And they did. The Dominion had ruled through fear. They had convinced the galaxy that resistance was impossible, that their power was absolute. But power meant nothing when the illusion was broken. The rebellion was not coordinated. It was not planned. It did not need to be. The moment the people of the galaxy saw their rulers in fear, they understood the truth. The Dominion could be hurt. The Dominion could be killed. Across 1,000 worlds, their empire burned. The species they had enslaved, the civilizations they had crushed, turned on them in unrelenting waves. Garrisons were overrun, supply lines cut. Their own soldiers deserted, unwilling to die for an empire that could no longer protect them. The High Council's last transmission to their remaining strongholds was a desperate plea, not for victory, not for survival, but for escape. The war was over. The Dominion was finished. Their worlds fell, one by one, until there was nothing left but ruins and silence. No one knows when the last Zalzar ruler died. Some say they were torn apart by the very people they had once enslaved. Others claim they vanished into the void, running from an enemy that never needed to chase them, because by then it didn't matter. Humanity had already won. They had done what no species had ever dared to do. Not just defeat the Dominion, but erase it from history. Their homeworlds were left untouched, but no one returned to them. The Zalzar were not worth extermination. They were worth something far worse. Irrelevance. The war ended without a declaration. No treaties. No negotiations. The galaxy simply moved forward, leaving the Dominion to rot in the shadows. And humanity? They never reappeared. They had won the war before it had truly begun. And then, as if they had never existed, they vanished. Some say they are still out there, watching, waiting, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as a reminder that the untouchable can be touched, that the invincible can fall, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming.